So what are the new changes with the big NAR lawsuit, and how's it going to affect, number one, buyers and sellers if they're out in the market in today's new world, I should say. So if you're interested in that, stick around because I'm going to go over all the information that you would want to know. And if this is your first time here, my name is Rich. I'm a local coastal Maryland and Delaware realtor. Appreciate you coming by. And if you need to reach out for any reason, contact information is going to be down below in the description. But let's not waste any time. I'm going to hop right into the video. And without further ado, let's do it. All right, so let's first talk about what the lawsuits are all about and why everything's happening the way it is and the new rules. This was one of the bigger case here. I think it was in Missouri, the Sitzer-Burnett case. Biggest gripe in here, it shows like in this article right here, is the plaintiffs took particular issue with cooperative compensation. So what does that mean? So that really means that the old way, or how things were usually done, the listing agent would meet with Mr. and Mrs. Seller. They want to sell their house. And this is just an example. Let's just say, so they negotiate the realtor fee compensation at 5%. So that would be talked about. And what it means by cooperative means usually a portion of that, usually 50% of it, would be shared with any buyer's agent that would bring a buyer. And that would be advertised mainly on the MLS, saying, hey, there's 2.5% offered compensation to any buyer's agent that brings a buyer, and we go to settlement. And I guess the big complaint with the sellers was that, well, they felt like I guess they paid too much, or they're paying a portion of the buyer's agent that's representing the buyer, so to speak. But also in the same terms is it kind of promotes activity on that property to help sell it. Although, if it's listed on, something like the MLS and being advertised, I mean, the home has to be a right fit for somebody regardless. But I guess this is what if it's negotiated up front, sellers are pretty much saying they didn't have much of a say of what the portion, how much the buyer's agent would get paid. So what they came up with to decouple that, and what I mean by that, so now if you're going to sell, what that looks like, in Maryland or Delaware, really any state now, you would just negotiate what you're going to compensate your listing broker. So let's just say that's 2.5%. So you have that, and of course you can say, hey, I'm open to seller concessions to compensate a buyer's agent, to compensate for the buyer's obligation with their broker. If they come and put a contract on there, and it could be X amount. But really, there's nothing in the listing agreement that says that you have to put an amount. And same thing in the MLS. That's negotiated when that particular offer is brought to the table, and really that buyer/buyer agent has to put in their offer and ask for that compensation concession. So they'll ask for that 2.5% at the time of the offer. So I can see it does give, I think, the seller more flexibility. Say if they were going to originally pay 3% towards a buyer's agent, and the buyer's agent brings the offer and they're asking for 2.5%, that it makes sense. Obviously, the seller would want to pay less than more. But also I could see if the buyer brings a lower offer, let's say if that property's listed for $400 and they bring an offer for $360, and they're asking for that 2.5% in the seller concession, the seller can look at the bottom line and be like, well, hey, we'll do list price and cover the buyer broker's fee for you. as a concession, or we'll do X and we'll cover 1.5%, then you cover the rest. It does break open more variables and more negotiation on that side of things. So either way, bottom line, sellers are looking at what they're going to net take away from the table, and buyers are looking at obviously their closing costs. If they got to put 20% down, and then if they're getting a loan, they have their lender fees. So that's really the breakdown of maybe the case and how the realtor fee / commissions are working now. The big thing too is, there used to be no buyer agents. I think before the 1990s, I read that they actually came up with buyer agency in the 90s because there was a lot of consumer complaints, thinking that the listing agent was working for them or helping them out, but in actuality, they're actually working for the seller. So I'm sure there's complaints, maybe lawsuits from that. So they came up with buyer agency, and that cooperative compensation, the old way back then and now, until recently, until these new rules came out, to make sure that buyers were protected and their best interest was looked after as well. That's why now in contracts in Delaware and Maryland and most states, there's always a explanation of who real estate agents represent. There's a seller agent, there's a buyer's agent, there could be a dual agency, if that's legal in your state. All right, so let's take a look at this is from the MLS here, Bright MLS that we use. And this is just going over 5 things that are mandated now that changed in the rules that realtors have to follow. So here's number 1. So before you first take someone on a showing or virtual tour, they must sign a contract agreeing to any amount the buyer's broker may earn from any source for the work that they're doing. So I'm going to show you that form. So this basically says you have to have that conversation, and a buyer's agent has to explain what their fee is up front. And that's negotiated between the buyers and the buyer agent. And it also says in that form, which I'll show you here in a second, that you can ask for a seller concession to cover that obligation. Number 2, you cannot represent that your services are free or available at no cost unless there will be no compensation at any source. So that number 2 was directed to, sometimes buyer agents would say their services were free, but they were getting compensated from the seller side. So technically it was not, that's a little misleading. So it looks at number 3, your seller must approve in writing any offer to share compensation, though this is instead will typically be in response to a buyer asking the seller to cover their costs. So this is what we mean by when an offer is submitted. It specifically says in contracts, there's going to be a section where you can ask the seller to cover the buyer's obligation on the broker side, the buyer's agent fee. You need to disclose in writing that commissions are not set by law and are negotiable. And I don't think I talked about this before on there, but they specifically put this verbiage in all the documents now. Because, commissions have always been negotiable. Just this new way is kind of splitting it apart. And I don't want to say it's making it more negotiable, but it's having the conversations more up front, especially on the buyer side. So last one here, you cannot filter or restrict listings communicated to a client based on the amount offered to pay the buyer broker. Like I said, Maryland and Delaware always had a buyer broker representation agreement kind of like this. But now it's mandated. I'm not quite sure how it will be regulated. I guess they can do a surprise audit to make sure you have the proper documentation on file with any buyers that you're working with. But my brokerage, EXP, became very proactive with coming out with new forms for their agents to make sure everybody's in compliance way before the settlement date, which is August 17th is when everything has to be done, and all the verbiage, contracts, and all that have to be taken over. But this is what the broker representation agreement looks like. Before you start viewing properties, you know, somebody like me, your agent, should be going over this with you and explaining. And this kind of breaks down like what kind of property you're looking for and where. The length of the agreement, you know, actually would put in there the length of time. It says the agency disclosure. It says the agency relationship between the buyer and broker determines how a broker will work on the buyer's behalf. So this talks about broker's efforts. So it says, you know, broker will exercise in good faith, locate and present suitable properties, you know, do everything by the rules, help you find the property, negotiate it, even after the purchase too, which I found that, you know, sometimes I'm actually working with a client now, had some issues with a air conditioner, mechanical thing, which can happen. You know, so I'm still actually, even though we went to settlement, still helping my client out with actually trying to get them help with some of the fixes. So Section 6 talks about broker fee. So, you know, they have that verbiage in there. Broker fee is not set by law, fully negotiable. So this clearly state the broker's fee here, percentage, or you can do a flat fee. And the big thing on here is what I've been told on the legal side of things, that you can't negotiate up, you can only go down, which I thought that was interesting. So this is negotiate up front between me and, let's say, my buyer client. So if I put 2.5% in here and we find the perfect property and we find out actually that seller is offered a 3% concession towards any buyer's agent, I have to still take the 2.5%. I can't up that to 3% because I can't go up. You can only go down. But you could also, another scenario in this too, is like I said, which I've done this on the seller side. If you're working a deal and let's just say we had 2.5% in there and we just couldn't make it work with the numbers, with the offer price, and with the, you know, with the existing closing costs the buyer has, and plus with the buyer broker fee here, you know, I've actually adjusted that down to make things work, to make a deal, because at the end of the day, that's what it's about. So then this is explains about collecting the broker fee from the seller, you know, credit to the buyer at the closing, and there's a direct seller to broker compensation. Any additional terms you can put in there. Skip down to cancellation. Either party may cancel this agreement effective upon delivery of a written notice to the other party unless buyer is under contract to purchase the property. It gives you an idea on the form, and you know, this is obviously on your buyer side. For sellers, listing agreement looks pretty much the same, just any verbiage of cooperating compensations out. And like I said, all you'll see in there is the listing agent to seller compensation. So that's usually about half. Whenever that perfect buyer comes and they offer up, if you want to offer concessions, you can. Hopefully that made sense. I know it gets a little confusing, especially, well, even for real estate agents and realtors that are in the industry. But you know, it's really just breaking apart the realtor fee commissions up front and keeping it really negotiable at the time of the offer when the buyer comes up. So I think I've said before in the video that just hearing what other agents were saying in different states that started doing this beforehand, like in California, I think New York, you know, sellers are still offering to cover a lot of those buyer agent fees as concessions. And you know, it really just comes down to what the deal looks like. You know, bottom line, seller is going to be looking at their net bottom line. And same thing with buyers too. I mean, obviously they have costs and a good amount of costs with lending fees and putting that 20% down and you know, covering the closing costs up front too. End of the day, it's really just working out the best deal for seller and buyer. There isn't, I think, a little bit more moving parts, variables, but that's why you need a good agent to look out for you and handle all that. And you know, things will still go smoothly, and making sure everybody's treated fairly and gets a fair deal. So that's what it's all about. So again, if the video has helped you out, make sure that you show the love, click that like button, subscribe so you don't miss any of the content that I come out with every week. And of course, until next time, I'll see you soon.